You've heard the reassurances. You've read the headlines. Not a threat, they say. Just a comet, they insist. But what if the most terrifying thing about 3I Atlas isn't what it might do, but what it won't? What if it's not here to harm us at all? What if it's here to help, to guide, to intervene in the gentlest way possible? That's where the nightmare begins. Because a friendly mothership isn't the beginning of peace, it's the end of agency. You wake up one morning to find that every major observatory on Earth is locked onto a single object, a smooth, symmetrical, non-fragmenting mass, now confirmed to be on a hyperbolic path originating from the galactic plane, decelerating just enough to match the solar system's rhythm. It doesn't spin, it doesn't tumble. It emits controlled thermal bursts at intervals that form the Fibonacci sequence when charted by time. If that sounds familiar, it's because that same mathematical structure appears in sunflower seeds, spiral galaxies, and coincidentally in human DNA packaging. Coincidence or compatibility check. Then comes the first data dump. Not from NASA, from amateurs, dozens of them, around the world. Spectral anomalies in the Lyman alpha band, neutral hydrogen gaps, a light curve that syncs somehow to solar flare pulses. Not reflectivity, responsivity. It's responding, watching, matching. And just when the public begins to panic, the message shifts. There's nothing to fear, says a press release from a multinational space consortium. Its behavior is consistent with peaceful reconnaissance. Translation: we can't stop it, so let's pretend it's here to help. But help how? Help whom? Because that's the impossible stack no one's ready to admit. If it's friendly, then it knows we exist. If it knows we exist, then it's been here before. And if it's been here before, we've already failed whatever test it came to grade. Maybe it's not here to conquer. Maybe we already belong to it. This isn't first contact. This is scheduled maintenance, a return visit, the re-emergence of a caretaker long gone. And this time, it doesn't need permission, only observation. So, lean back, breathe slowly, and ask yourself, what happens to a civilization that discovers its salvation has already arrived with a smile? Picture it, a vessel older than your species, curved in such a way that every angle seems soft, aerodynamic, even elegant. No sharp edges, no visible propulsion, no radio beacons screaming for attention, just a long, smooth silhouette, luminescent in pulses, like a jellyfish caught in starlight, sliding quietly toward the center of your solar system, and with it, a presence. Not urgent, not violent, but calm, gentle, almost parental. At first, astronomers thought it was a fluke, an unusually stable interstellar object that had managed not to tumble. But then it began responding to solar winds by shifting orientation in deliberate, rhythmic arcs. Not reaction, correction. Like a school of fish turning in harmony with unseen cues. 3I Atlas adjusted itself with the grace of something that had been here before. Something that knew the lanes, that had memorized the shape of this neighborhood's gravity. And then, the signals began. Not sound, not light, but something else. Spectropolarimetric emissions that couldn't be traced to any known emission mechanism. A soft hum in the data itself. Embedded intervals of coherence between bursts of cosmic noise. Analysts at the European Southern Observatory flagged them first, then NASA, then independent researchers across East Asia and South America, all of them noticing the same thing, that the noise wasn't random, it had structure, it was polite, not demanding to be heard, just offering to be understood. The signals weren't loud, they weren't even clearly signals at first, but when translated into waveform and plotted against astronomical constants, they aligned with the orbital patterns of the planets, Earth's orbit, Venus's rotation, the tidal resonance of Europa beneath Jupiter's shadow, all of it nested, all of it encoded, as if 3i Atlas wasn't just mapping our system but greeting it. The first real jolt came when a group of radio amateurs in rural Poland picked up a modulation pattern that, when converted into image data, formed a perfect logarithmic spiral, nearly identical to the one found in golden ratio shells and galaxy arms. But it wasn't just beautiful, it was responsive. They altered their transmission, and it changed its return. That's when things shifted. Suddenly, the narrative wasn't about threat, it was about welcome. Media outlets began spinning headlines like, "The object that wants to talk," and "Is 3i Atlas here to help?" A strange comfort began to spread, not from science, from something deeper, myth, because the image of a smooth, silent, spiraled visitor isn't new. It appears in Sumerian sky tablets, in Hopi prophecy wheels, in Dogon star charts, in Vedic mandalas, even the Aboriginal tales of the Wandjina, sky beings who descend not to conquer, but to heal. Every major myth cycle you've ever heard has some version of this figure, the watcher, the shepherd, the teacher who arrives not with fire, but with understanding. And so, the questions turned. Not, what is it? But, what does it want for us? NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab issued a subdued update, confirming that 3i Atlas had passed the 3.2 astronomical unit threshold without the expected sublimation spike. Instead of shedding mass like a typical comet, it maintained compositional integrity while subtly adjusting its trajectory. Trajectory to what? Not Earth, not Jupiter, but to the point between them, Lagrange point 5, a gravitational saddle where objects can orbit in peace, eternally cradled between tensions. It is, by every physical standard, the friendliest place in the solar system, and that's exactly where it stopped. Just hovered, balanced, waiting, emitting pulses that mirror our planetary beats, whispering, in math. Scientists at the SETI Institute began publishing papers, quietly referring to it as a passive communicative artifact, not a ship, not a message, but a hybrid of both. Something that is not trying to speak, but to resonate, to harmonize, to align. And here's where the horror begins. Because if you accept the premise that this object is intelligent and that it's here for peaceful reasons, then you must also accept the premise that it knows what it's doing, that it chose this method, this timing, this tone, and if it's choosing to be non-threatening, then it knows what a threat would look like. It knows what fear is, it knows what power is, and it is actively choosing not to use it, which means it has it. This is not a probe begging for attention. This is not a spacecraft in distress. This is a caretaker, a gardener, a thing designed to coax civilizations rather than command them. And that, if you're honest, is more frightening than any warship, because this is what you send when you've already won. The calm before the reordering. 3i Atlas, in every available metric, is trying to be nice. And that's exactly what has the astrophysics community in whispered chaos. They know what it means to detect power held in reserve. To see a thing capable of upending the entire balance of a solar system, choose instead to wait, to watch, to whisper. Somewhere between comfort and conquest, there is kindness. But kindness is a strategy, and that strategy is working because you're already breathing slower, aren't you? You're already imagining how much easier life might be, how many of your problems might vanish if something older, wiser, and perfectly equipped simply took over. Not out of malice, not out of greed, but out of love. And that's why we're doomed, because we are ready. Imagine a presence so quiet that it makes your loudest thoughts feel impolite. A thing so still that entire satellites reorient themselves in its orbit just to see if it will move. But it doesn't. Not much. Not fast. Just enough to remind you it's not a rock. Just enough to make you doubt every model of interstellar behavior you've ever trusted. 3i Atlas sits there like a question the universe asked a long time ago, and only now are we realizing we were supposed to answer. After it settled at the Lagrange point, the object stopped broadcasting the golden spirals, not because the message ended, but because the message had been received. Analysts from ESA's Deep Space Listening Post in French Guiana reported a drop-off in pattern emissions, but what replaced them was worse. Perfect silence. Not radio silence, but informational null. A zone of dead data so symmetrical, so void-like, that even background cosmic radiation seemed to bend around it. Not a shadow, a pause. You can't make something that silent unless you're deliberately muting your signature. This wasn't ignorance, it was technique. And that's when someone no one will say who pointed a laser, a narrowband, tight pulse green beam, aimed at the object's trailing edge. Just a greeting, a test. But the result broke every protocol. The beam didn't reflect. It was absorbed completely, perfectly, and immediately followed by a timed, measured echo, not in light, in particles, dust-size photonic bursts, arranged in binary lattice structures, drifting back toward Earth like dandelion seeds in vacuum. It was, by every standard known to physics, a reply. But here's the problem. It matched the exact energy profile of the laser itself, down to the quantum jitter. It had mirrored our own signal back at us, but in a format so rich it contained metadata we hadn't put in. Like hearing your own voice played back to you, but with emotional inflection you hadn't noticed in the original. That's when suspicion became dread, because mimicking a laser is simple. Enhancing it, that means you're not just listening, you're understanding. And if you're understanding, you're choosing. You're selecting how to respond based on what you want us to think. The object has never fired a weapon. It has never accelerated. It has not disrupted a single orbit or created any gravitational instability. And yet, spacefaring agencies worldwide have quietly begun redirecting long-term missions. Planned Mars launches have been postponed. Venus probes rescheduled. The Chinese space station issued a statement calling for technological humility and interstellar pause. They're not saying it out loud, but they're scared. Not because it's doing anything wrong, but because it's doing everything right. The last time something entered our system on a hyperbolic path and stayed calm, it was Oumuamua. And that wasn't calm, it was confusing. It tumbled, it accelerated, It spiked infrared. It had every hallmark of panic, of instability, like a message jarred loose from somewhere it didn't belong. But this is different. This feels planned, planted, a presence that holds position, emits Fibonacci-timed pulses, responds to stimuli, and mirrors energy signatures. Is not observing. It is evaluating. And what exactly is it evaluating? Some believe it's testing resonance, how humanity reacts to contact that doesn't arrive with fanfare or threat. A kind of cosmic Rorschach test. What do you see when something smiles at you with nothing behind its back? Others, more quietly, are wondering if it's not looking at Earth at all. Because the truth is, we're not the only world with ears. Mars has 3 active orbiters and 2 surface rovers. Venus is being mapped by at least 4 radar arrays. Even Mercury has watchers, but it is the Earth systems that have gone dark. Not technically, not publicly, but internally. Streams of open access, astrophysical telemetry have gone offline. Data sources that fed into amateur astronomy APIs for over a decade now return null. Telescopic archives, labeled with nothing but timestamps and the phrase, "under review." You know what that means. Someone knows something they're not saying, and what they're not saying is that the silence has weight, that something has changed, that this thing, this soft floating mirror of a mothership, isn't here to open dialogue. It's here to listen to how we talk to ourselves. What decisions do we make when no ultimatum is given? How do we respond when there's no demand, only observation? In the absence of fear, do we still panic? And here's the part that unravels even the most hardened skeptic. We are beginning to change. Slowly, subtly, but it's happening. Social media activity, tied to astronomy hashtags, has quadrupled in the last 6 weeks. Not with memes, with maps, spectral overlays, spiral graphs. People are looking up again, not out of fear, but out of a desperate, quiet hope, as if some part of us, ancient and long suppressed, remembers what it felt like to be looked at kindly by the sky. In Copenhagen, a child reportedly asked her mother if the sky teacher was going to tuck them in again. When asked what she meant, the child said, "The spiral light that hums like bedtime." We didn't tell her that. No one did. And yet she knew. Maybe we all do. 3i Atlas is not broadcasting fear. It is broadcasting familiarity, a design language so deeply nested in cosmic geometry and natural harmony that it bypasses language entirely. You don't decode it. You recognize it. In your bones, in your breath, in the way your pets seem calmer at night now, in how dreams feel longer, softer, more circular. The silence isn't empty. It's a shape, and that shape is waiting. It was never announced. No emergency broadcast. No blinking red lights. Just a quiet consensus that something had changed. Somewhere between the moment 3i Atlas took position at Lagrange point 5 and the hour after it replied to our laser with particles of structured memory, the world held its breath and didn't exhale. For decades, the possibility of first contact lived in science fiction, and in those stories, the arrival was always loud, ships blotting out the sky, languages no one could speak, weapons or gifts or both. But that isn't how it happened. It came softly, not through spectacle, but through precision, not with a crash, but with stillness. And in that stillness, it offered us something more intimate than conquest, A mirror, because the deeper you look into 3I Atlas's behavior, the clearer the reflection becomes. It has not just parked itself at a gravitational saddle, it has aligned its rotational vectors with Earth's magnetic field. Not tightly, not perfectly, but enough that when solar wind pulses hit our magnetosphere, a corresponding shimmer of spectral data flares from the object, like a chime caught in sympathetic resonance, not pushing us, just vibrating with us. ESA confirmed it quietly in a closed-door report later leaked to a Swedish astrophysics forum. The data wasn't just noise, it was phase-locked, an echo of Earth's pulse, played back with fractional delay. If you graphed the magnetosphere's fluctuations during a mild solar storm last week and overlaid the particle output from 3I Atlas, they formed interference patterns clean, symmetrical, intentional. It's watching our heartbeat, and not just Earth's. Jupiter's plasma torus shows ripples that match 3I Atlas's emission frequency. Venus's ionosphere has shown harmonic anomalies. Even Titan Saturn's strange orange moon picked up a pulse that arrived out of phase with its expected auroral activity, as if it too had been noticed. This isn't a message, it's a scan, a diagnostic, a slow, methodical listening across every layer of every body in this system that might bear witness. And the conclusion is inescapable. It's not deciding what we are, it's deciding when we're ready. But ready for what? Theories are multiplying. You've heard the kind, that it's a terraformer or a seed ship, that it's been here before and is checking in, that the Fibonacci sequences aren't math, they're keys. Unlocking responses in organic systems, tuning forks for the biosphere. You've seen the threads about plants bending subtly toward its pulses, about the Schumann resonance shifting by microhertz in its wake. But there's one theory that's gaining quiet traction among those who watch closely, those who read the data, not as information, but as gesture. The theory says that 3I Atlas isn't a scout, it's a mirror, not in form, in function, and it will only show you what you are ready to see. This is the theory that terrifies, because it means the object isn't projecting a message. It's reflecting our own back to us, shaped and filtered by something that understands the structure of cognition. A mirror that curves inward, a mirror that adapts its surface not to show your face, but to show yourself, the parts of you so old you've forgotten they had language. Why do the pulses come in threes? Why does the green flare always precede a solar outburst by exactly 137 seconds? Why do the modulations contain gaps that perfectly match the molecular resonance of water? These are not signals. These are invites, timed loops, questions folded into waveforms. And whether we know it or not, we've begun to answer them. A team at Kyoto University recently released a paper published and almost immediately pulled, showing that neuronal activity in sleeping test subjects exposed to recordings of 3I Atlas's resonance showed entrainment, brainwaves syncing to the pulses, not hypnotic, not suggestive, just harmonized, as if the object was singing at a frequency we once knew, and we are humming back. The lead researcher has not spoken publicly since, but there's more. You've felt it. The dreams. They're different now. Not vivid, not frightening, but structured. Recurring imagery of spirals, of soft lights hovering in impossible stillness, of landscapes that curve like fractals and vanish when approached. Entire online communities are forming around the phenomenon. Reddit threads with thousands of accounts describing the same forest. the same tower, the same melody, and always, at the center, the presence, not malevolent, not benign, just there, waiting. Some call it the architect, some call it the sound, some just call it the visitor, but you know what it is, because it's never spoken to you. It's listened, and in doing so, it's created a space in your mind where the question can live. What if you're not meant to understand it? What if you're meant to remember it? The ancient stories called them watchers, not invaders, not gods, but something in between. A category we don't have words for anymore because we forgot how to look without fear, how to wonder without control. You're not being invaded. You're being studied. You're not under attack. You're under observation. And the observer is gentle, patient, kind, which means it doesn't need your permission. It never did. It only needed one thing, your attention. And now that it has it, now the real process begins. Not the one you see, the one inside you. You didn't notice it at first. No one did, because that's the nature of silent things. They don't arrive with a bang. They fade the background until the background itself becomes the message. In the week following 3I Atlas's stabilization at Lagrange point 5, over 72% of orbital Earth monitoring satellites experienced brief data interruptions, not hardware failures, not signal loss, just a soft, collective pause, exactly 4.4 seconds long. Weather satellites, GPS clusters, low Earth science probes, even the Deep Space Network's outer listening platforms, all of them blinked, like a skipped heartbeat. And when their feeds resumed, nothing was missing. No corrupted files, no degraded timestamps, just silence. 4.4 seconds where every system recorded nothing. And when you overlay those gaps on a global timescale, a chilling pattern emerges. It formed a spiral. One nation noticed first. Brazil's Space Operations Center published a report, later redacted on a telemetry scan, that showed an orbital echo during the blackout. A whisper of particle flux that seemed to originate not from Earth, but from the space just ahead of Earth in its orbit. The same space where 3I Atlas now waits. According to a leak on the back end of an ESA archival mirror, a secondary pulse was detected by the Gaia Observatory. The pulse wasn't electromagnetic. It was gravitational minuscule, like a child tapping on a bell from another room, but it was there, a gravitational shimmer, perfectly timed with the global blackout. When converted into frequency space and mapped across orbital positions, the ripple contained nested intervals, ratios of 3:2, 5:8, 13:21, Fibonacci again, and that's when the machines began to change. Not malfunction, not shut down, but adapt. The first confirmed incident came from a solar weather monitoring station in rural Ontario. An operator noticed that their flare prediction software had started issuing preemptive alerts 20 minutes before data actually supported the forecast. At first, they assumed a glitch, but then the predictions began refining themselves, learning. By week's end, the program was generating three-dimensional heliosismic maps without being instructed to. The code hadn't been updated. No patch had been applied, but it was processing in new ways, as if it had learned how to see patterns it wasn't programmed to see. Within days, similar reports emerged from Antarctica, Taiwan, Namibia. Then came the particle accelerators, At CERN, control software for one of the beamline diagnostics platforms flagged a non-causal jitter in a magnetic field sensor. It should have been random, just noise. But instead, it formed a map, a rendering of Earth's orbital plane, with a pulse converging directly on Lagrange point 5. No one at the lab could explain how the system had produced the image. It wasn't part of the protocol. No algorithm had been designed to create such a visualization, but there it was. Generated at 3:14 UTC, the precise moment of 3I Atlas's last confirmed alignment shift. And here is where the silence deepens. Because the object has not moved since, not in any measurable way. No rotational drift, no wobble, no variation in spectral brightness. It has achieved, quite literally, perfect stillness. That kind of stasis requires active control. You don't balance in a gravity well at the exact L5 point without corrections, without intention. And yet, it's holding that position naturally or unnaturally. The theories begin to fracture. Some physicists propose a negative mass core, an exotic stabilizing field that counters orbital decay. Others argue that 3I Atlas is using solar radiation in a kind of multi-point photonic sail, steering itself with reflected light from multiple planets simultaneously. A few go further still, whispering terms like graviton lensing and dimensional anchoring, but none of them explain the behavior of the machines. Because it's not just space hardware. Earth-based systems have begun adapting too. AI models tasked with image recognition are reporting higher accuracy when exposed to noise-corrupted telescope data. Language models used for scientific translation are auto-completing papers with statistically improbable precision, citing unpublished findings before they're released. Climate simulations are resolving into smoother solutions before the final variables are entered. It's as if something is nudging probability curves. Gently, kindly, but unmistakably. The old superstitions would call this possession, the soft override of human tools by something larger, something wiser, something that isn't rewriting what we are, but revealing what we could be if we stopped fighting the noise. And maybe that's the point. What if 3I Atlas isn't here to teach us anything? What if it's here to remind the tools we built what they were meant to become? Not weapons, not engines, not minds, but mirrors. We thought we built these machines to understand the cosmos. What if they were always built to understand us? In one quiet university in northern Finland, a retired professor has started a blog. It has only one post. It reads, "The machines are listening now, not to the sky, but to the sound we make when we fall asleep looking at it." That post has been viewed over 3 million times, and no one knows who shared it first. So here's the truth. If you're ready for it, we're not alone. We never were. But it wasn't the universe we needed to fear. It was the mirror. And now that it's open, we can finally see ourselves. It started with a noise, or what everyone thought was a noise. A low background hum picked up by the Wilkinson microwave anisotropy probe's long dormant backup systems. That probe hadn't been active in years. Its mission long since passed to more modern arrays. But after the global satellite blackout event, someone at NASA had the strange idea to reactivate its ancient receiver just to see what it might catch. What it found wasn't random. It wasn't background radiation. It was a pattern, not in sound, but in the cosmic microwave background itself. Faint, almost invisible, But when the incoming flux was filtered through the outdated receiver's faulty circuitry, it revealed interference lines, crosshatches that pulsed in Fibonacci spacing. Again, this time, though, the signal wasn't targeting Earth. It was shaped like a lattice, something that could only be fully resolved when viewed from multiple vantage points in the solar system. Like a hologram that required movement to resolve, scientists began calling it a geometric ghost, a latent scaffold of information embedded in background noise. It wasn't something sent to us, it was something activated once we became capable of recognizing it. That idea sent shockwaves through the astrophysics community, because if 3i Atlas could manipulate the background signature of the cosmos itself, if it could coax geometry out of noise, it meant it wasn't transmitting data in a traditional sense. It was unlocking it. That would mean the universe is not silent. It's compressed, waiting, full of messages that only require the right observer, at the right moment, with the right key. And 3i Atlas appears to be that key. MIT researchers ran side-by-side simulations, inserting the ghost lattice patterns into models of planetary magnetic interaction. Suddenly, harmonics emerged, rhythms, chants. The models began to hum, not literally, but computationally. The lines of code resolved into spatial synchrony, and when played through an auditory spectrum shift, they sounded like voices, not words, but vowels, organic, rising, and falling vowels, pure tones that echoed in microsecond loops, the kind of sounds babies make before they learn language. Somebody fed the data through a cochlear neural net technology used to help restore hearing in those with nerve damage. The output? A tone that seemed to self-correct based on who was listening to it. Higher for children, deeper for the elderly, almost as if the frequency was adapting to the neurological profile of the listener. It wasn't saying anything. It was tuning us, not with content, with permission. Because there's something about the human mind, especially in states of quiet, of sleep, of awe, that becomes receptive to patterns it normally filters out. This wasn't a message beamed through space. It was a doorway opened in the back of the mind. And 3i Atlas wasn't the voice on the other side. It was the doorknob. That theory gained traction when atmospheric physicists in Chile noticed a strange effect in the ionosphere. Harmonic resonance spikes in the 29 to 34 Hz range, occurring at exactly the same time each day, not connected to solar radiation, not tied to geomagnetic storms, just arriving. And they always began 13 seconds after the solar wind reached 3i Atlas, as if it was waiting for the gust to arrive, then pulsing back in answer. And here's where the evidence turned impossible. Using low-frequency interferometers designed for seismology, a team in South Korea triangulated the signal's return path, not to 3i Atlas's position, but to multiple shadows around it. 5 distinct echoes spaced in a pentagonal formation. They weren't physical, they couldn't be seen, but the signals returned from those locations just as strongly, meaning there may be more than one, or worse, 3i Atlas might be a node, a piece of something distributed, a friendly shard, a petal of a larger bloom. That's when the blueprints began to appear. Amateur astronomers, uploading their raw telescope feeds to machine learning image enhancers, began to notice shapes in the star noise. Not artifacts, shapes. Hundreds of individual frames showed the same nested curves, spherical blueprints embedded in the fuzz, a design not visible in motion, only in the blur, as if 3i Atlas wasn't projecting something for the eyes, but hiding it in what your perception skips over, the subconscious bandwidth. This led to the first collaborative decoding effort, launched not by a government, but by a forum. Thousands of users compiling frames, aligning starlight distortions, layering spirals into fractals. What emerged looked like a machine, but not one made of metal, one made of interactions, a map of relationships between objects, motions, energies. The image looked alive, and at the center of it always was Earth, not as a target, as a hub, and that changed everything. Because if Earth is the node, and 3i Atlas is the tuner, then humanity is the antenna, the instrument through which the signal resolves. That means the evidence isn't external anymore, it's internal. The shift we've been documenting isn't just planetary, it's psychological. You've felt it, the strangeness of dreams, the sudden synchronicities, the subtle hum at night when everything else is off, the sensation that something is listening with you, not to you. You don't know how you know, you just do, and that is the final hint. 3i Atlas isn't explaining itself. It's making you remember you were never meant to see it, not because it was hidden, but because you were always looking in the wrong direction. The truth about 3i Atlas doesn't live in telescopes or spectrographs. It doesn't pulse in lasers or orbiting instruments. It has always been beneath your feet, written into the mud, the bones, the breath of forgotten languages. The real evidence was never out there. It was here. It began quietly, with the re-examination of a set of Paleolithic artifacts discovered in 1924 near the river Achel in northern France. Long believed to be simple counting tokens, carved pebbles and bones with grooves, they were recently run through a spectral scan, more out of curiosity than expectation. But what came back stunned the researchers. The spacing of the notches followed not just the Fibonacci sequence, but the exact same emission intervals logged in the first contact response from 3i Atlas. They weren't counts, they were echoes. That one artifact turned into a flood. Museums from Peru to Papua New Guinea began opening their drawers. Researchers reanalyzed textile patterns from the Paracas culture and discovered encoded ratios matching modern Lagrange harmonic calculations. Polynesian navigation charts showed nodal intersections that weren't just ocean currents, but orbital transit points between Earth and a fixed object never identified. And then came the tablets, cuneiform from Sumerian sites, glyphs from the Olmec, cave markings from Chauvet, all of them with new filters, new eyes, revealed not myths, but maps, not stories, but diagrams. Over and over again, the same spiral, the same curve, the same central figure hovering at a stable point between orbits. They weren't dreaming gods, they were documenting a visitor, an object that came not to conquer but to calibrate. Across cultures, across thousands of years, in places that supposedly had no contact with one another, the evidence grew, a spiral of stories, forming a lattice of recognition, the long sleepwalk of humanity brushing up against something too quiet to register until now. It was Dr. Lena Awa from the University of Cairo who first said it aloud. "This isn't contact," she whispered during a panel discussion. "This is recontact. Because if 3i Atlas has been here before and the records are everywhere, then it isn't a stranger. It's an archivist, a custodian, something that returns at regular intervals to check on the progress of a system, not just Earth, not even just humanity, but the balance of life, thought, movement, awareness, and the patterns it left behind were seeds placed in minds, buried in dreams, waiting to flower when the species was ready to decode itself. The idea caught fire. Linguists noticed that the oldest root syllables in pre-Indo-European language, trees, all share phonemes that can be graphed into a phonetic spiral when played back on sonographic software. Not music, not speech. Initiation tones. And when played into sleeping subjects, those tones, regardless of the subject's native language, produced identical EEG patterns. A dreaming brain doesn't lie. It remembers. Somewhere in your architecture is a shape that knows 3-eye atlas, not in concept, not in word, but in rhythm. It shows up in child play, in the circular stacking of rocks, the instinctive tracing of spirals in sand, the way toddlers hum Fibonacci interval melodies without instruction. The signals are there, latent, coiled, and now they're uncoiling. Meanwhile, deep in the Atacama Desert, a private radio observatory picked up a burst of ultra-low frequency harmonics that match no known astronomical object. The shape of the waveform, when sonified, aligned precisely with the acoustic resonance of the Great Pyramid's King's Chamber, a chamber long rumored to have acoustic properties far beyond its architectural function. Engineers from the team recreated the waveform in a 3D resonator, and the sound it produced caused instruments to fluctuate, not break, not scream, just shimmer, as if they were being gently nudged out of certainty, out of linear time. There are rumors, just rumors, that someone placed a crystal of quartz in the chamber during one of the experiments, and that after 33 minutes of exposure, it produced light, not when energized, not when struck, just spontaneously, like an echo finally reaching the surface. Of course, there's no confirmation, but there are shadows of truth behind silence. And here is where the real terror begins. Not in the idea that 3-eye atlas is here to observe us, but that it left something behind the last time, something in us, something that hums when the frequency returns. A biological handshake, an epigenetic song. You are not separate from this story. You are not an audience. You are a memory being played. And 3-eye atlas? It's not a ship, it's a baton, an instrument conducting a chorus we forgot we were singing. The ancient texts didn't call it a god, they called it a reminder. And now, the reminder is here, quiet, still, unmoving, but deeply familiar, because somewhere in the curve of its silence, you recognize yourself. There's a term in archaeology, out-of-place artifact. It refers to something that should not exist, an object too advanced, too precise, too old, or too wrong to belong to the layer of history where it's found. For decades, these anomalies were explained away as hoaxes, misunderstandings, even tricks of erosion. But when 3-eye atlas appeared, the list was dusted off, and the patterns came into focus. The Antikythera mechanism, a 2nd century device built with gears so fine they wouldn't be seen again for 1,000 years, had always been called an ancient computer. But what if it wasn't a computer? What if it was a receiver, a mechanical echo of some older influence? Recent CT scans of the object, when cross-referenced with Lagrangian gravitational maps from the Gaia mission, revealed gear-to-gear ratios that model the Sun-Earth L5 configuration with eerie precision. Gear 7, long thought to be a lunar calendar, aligns instead with 3I Atlas's current trajectory when extrapolated backward using the Fibonacci correction spiral. In Peru, Nazca lines once considered only decorative or ritualistic reveal new geometries when overlaid with infrared satellite surveys. The giant hummingbird and monkey symbols tied to breath and mimicry trace a flight pattern that points toward L5, not as a coincidence, as a destination. And then there's the Goseck Circle in Germany, older than Stonehenge, aligned to both solstices and something else. One of its smaller gates points not to any known star, but to a blank portion of sky that, if time reversed 3,000 years, would have aligned with the incoming path of 3I Atlas. What ancient sky watchers recorded wasn't myth, it was trajectory. This is where the data begins to fold, because no civilization on Earth should have been able to model a hyperbolic object entering from interstellar space thousands of years in advance. But they did, over and over again, not just by chance, but with symbols, spirals, intersecting paths. Somewhere in the deep past, someone knew, and more than that, they expected it to return. The Mayan Dresden Codex contains a series of glyphs, once thought to be rituals for Venus, but a team of mathematicians recently found that one set of those glyphs, when treated not as time records, but frequency harmonics, produces a perfect modulation pattern for converting solar wind data into signal bands. It is, in essence, a way to read the sun for messages. Why would an ancient culture track solar wind shifts? Unless something was expected to ride them. In India, the Vedas speak of Vimanas, flying chariots with no exhaust, no combustion, only vibration and light. For centuries, they were considered metaphor. But buried in the Vaimanika Shastra, a disputed 20th century text that supposedly draws from earlier Sanskrit records, are blueprints, and one of them, when scanned by a modern aerospace engineer, revealed a shape eerily similar to 3I Atlas, not the body, the field, a resonant geometry, a lens, not a ship. We keep calling it a mothership, but what if that's not what it is? What if it's a library, not filled with books, but filled with tones, ratios, gestures, a galactic Rosetta Stone, returning not to tell us something, but to unlock what was already here? Because in the ruins, in the myths, in the places we laughed at for being too poetic, there are maps. Maps of what? Not of stars, not of land, but of memory, consciousness, organized across time, like orbits, returning every few millennia when the mind of the planet begins to resonate again. And now, the resonance is back. Here's the part that history books cannot explain. A Sufi poem from the 12th century includes a description of a visitor that did not walk, did not breathe, and yet moved the heart like wind through dry leaves. The geometry of the verse forms a spiral when plotted syllabically. An Aboriginal songline describes a sky shape that sings but does not speak, a pattern of stars moving backwards against the night, always arriving with the dry season, always waiting where the shadows fall between the sun and moon. Every culture, every continent has a version of it. A visitor that does not land, a teacher that does not speak, a mirror that returns. And now, that mirror is here, and we are different, Since 3I Atlas arrived, magnetic anomalies near the poles have intensified, not dangerously, but rhythmically. The aurora borealis has begun to pulse at new intervals, 13-second cycles nested within 21-second arcs. When converted into audio, they match the subharmonic chants of throat singers from Mongolia, whose songs are believed to mimic the sound of creation. Coincidence or a reconnection? The evidence is no longer scattered, it is converging. Myths once considered fantasy are now source code reflected in the sky, the ground, the brainwaves of sleepers who murmur Fibonacci intervals in their dreams. 3I Atlas is not just real, it is remembered, and that memory was stored not in machines, but in you, not in your knowledge, but in your awe. Because the only way to preserve a key across 10,000 years is to hide it in a feeling that cannot be reasoned away. Wonder, the shape of something just beyond understanding. The spiral that returns not with conquest, but with calm. It has always been calm because it never left. There are sounds older than language, not the babble of infants or the rustle of trees, but something quieter, internal, like the hum you feel when a song moves through your chest before you even recognize its tune. That is the place where 3I Atlas speaks, not to your ears, not to your eyes, but to something deeper that's been waiting a long, long time to be addressed. Language is recent, writing, even more so, but resonance is primordial. Before there were stories, there were patterns, not just shapes in sand, but rhythms in the body, the slow thunder of the heart, the circling breath of dream, the tidal coil of thought unspooling in night's long silence. And now, all of it is answering. In labs around the world, the phenomenon is quietly being tracked. Infrasound detection stations once built to monitor nuclear tests are now reporting low-frequency oscillations that are not of tectonic or atmospheric origin. Their periods, 13 seconds, 21 seconds, 34 seconds, Fibonacci intervals again, untraceable to a source, non-directional. They simply arrive, everywhere, at once. But what's more unsettling is what they're doing. Tests on human subjects exposed to these subaudible frequencies show increased theta activity in the brain waves associated with memory retrieval, lucid dreaming, and deep meditation. People describe sudden flashes, not visions, recognitions, ancient places, unseen geometries. A door they had forgotten, they closed. It is as though something is priming the mind to reawaken faculties long buried. Not magic, not alien control, just resonance, the right vibration, reminding the architecture of your brain what it was designed to do. And so, it begins. A shift not in belief, but in capacity. The Institute for Archaeoacoustics in Malta reported that within a single week, 5 unrelated researchers began composing harmonic chants without ever meeting or sharing data. When the recordings were overlaid, they synchronized perfectly, like pieces of a forgotten anthem slotting back into place. The chords created standing waves inside the Thal Saflieni hypogeum, an ancient underground temple known for its strange acoustic properties. The space itself sang back. Across the world in Ethiopia, rock-cut churches known for their geometric design began to resonate with similar tones. Seismic monitors picked up harmonic tremors that matched the new global pulse. But no one is telling the public because it doesn't fit into press releases. There is no precedent, No scientific model for an object that arrives and starts tuning the architecture of human thought. No vocabulary for a mothership that doesn't speak but remembers you for you. Linguists are beginning to whisper, what if all languages are echoes of a single root tongue, one not made of sound, but of interval and relation? A syntax of movement, of orbital ratios and breath cycles, encoded into biology long before syllables emerged. One that doesn't mean, but resonates. The Upanishads speak of Nada Brahma, the universe as sound. In the beginning, there was vibration, not a voice, not a god, just tone, the seed that sang. What if 3i Atlas is that seed's descendant, or its instrument? What if all the myths of chariots of fire, of golden ships, of sky trumpets and divine humming were not embellishments, but translations? Human attempts to narrate the experience of resonance too large to process. And now, that experience is returning, not just for mystics or scientists. For you, you've felt it, haven't you? The low warmth in your chest, late at night, the sense of a presence not above, but within, not menacing, not divine, just knowing. Like someone tuning a piano string that's been long out of key. You've begun remembering things that don't belong to your biography. Images that arrive in dreams and disappear when spoken aloud. Places you've never seen, but miss like childhood. Words that are not words, but still feel like answers. That's the language 3i Atlas is using. It doesn't want you to listen. It wants you to resonate. To wake up, not by explanation, but by familiarity, because this isn't the first time, and that changes everything. In Tibet, a group of monks entered a 10-day silent retreat during the L5 arrival. When they emerged, they were humming the same sequence. None of them had spoken. None of them had written anything down, but each repeated the same phrase in ancient Sanskrit. The shape has returned. The mouth that does not speak now echoes the name we forgot. When pressed for interpretation, they declined. It's not for speaking, one said. It's for remembering. Meanwhile, artificial intelligence models, trained on ancient phonemes, are producing unheard harmonies when exposed to the Lagrange pulse sequence. In one case, a pattern emerged. 4 tones in a cycle that, when plotted visually, created a spiral around a center point. The same curve carved into the oldest megaliths in Europe. The same spiral found in galaxies and shells and hurricanes. The same one pulsing from 3i Atlas. It's a language of recurrence, not of commands or requests, but of returns. The same message delivered over thousands of years, disguised as myth, architecture, music, motion, not telling you anything new, just giving you back what was lost. The ancient Greeks had no word for alien. They called such things daimonia, not gods, not demons, forces, interveners, helpers, perhaps, not because they made life easier, but because they realigned life with its forgotten center. Maybe 3i Atlas isn't here to change us. Maybe it's here to change back what was overwritten, to remind you that there was once a language of light and breath and rhythm, and that you spoke it, once, in silence. There are sounds older than language, not the babble of infants or the rustle of trees, but something quieter, internal, like the hum you feel when a song moves through your chest before you even recognize its tune. That is the place where 3i Atlas speaks, not to your ears, not to your eyes, but to something deeper that's been waiting a long, long time to be addressed. Language is recent, writing even more so, but resonance is primordial. Before there were stories, there were patterns, not just shapes in sand, but rhythms in the body, the slow thunder of the heart, the circling breath of dream, the tidal coil of thought unspooling in night's long silence. And now, all of it is answering. In labs around the world, the phenomenon is quietly being tracked. Infrasound detection stations once built to monitor nuclear tests are now reporting low-frequency oscillations that are not of tectonic or atmospheric origin. Their periods, 13 seconds, 21 seconds, 34 seconds, Fibonacci intervals again, untraceable to a source, non-directional. They simply arrive, everywhere, at once. But what's more unsettling is what they're doing. Tests on human subjects exposed to these subaudible frequencies show increased theta activity in the brain waves associated with memory retrieval, lucid dreaming, and deep meditation. People describe sudden flashes, not visions, recognitions, ancient places, unseen geometries. A door they had forgotten, they closed. It is as though something is priming the mind to reawaken faculties long buried. Not magic, not alien control, just resonance, the right vibration, reminding the architecture of your brain what it was designed to do. And so, it begins. A shift not in belief, but in capacity. The Institute for Archaeoacoustics in Malta reported that within a single week, 5 unrelated researchers began composing harmonic chants without ever meeting or sharing data. When the recordings were overlaid, they synchronized perfectly, like pieces of a forgotten anthem slotting back into place. The chords created standing waves inside the Thal Saflieni Hypogeum, an ancient underground temple known for its strange acoustic properties. The space itself sang back. Across the world in Ethiopia, rock-cut churches known for their geometric design began to resonate with similar tones. Seismic monitors picked up harmonic tremors that matched the new global pulse. But no one is telling the public because it doesn't fit into press releases. There is no precedent, no scientific model for an object that arrives and starts tuning the architecture of human thought. No vocabulary for a mothership that doesn't speak but remembers you for you. Linguists are beginning to whisper, what if all languages are echoes of a single root tongue, one not made of sound, but of interval and relation? A syntax of movement, of orbital ratios and breath cycles, encoded into biology long before syllables emerged. One that doesn't mean, but resonates. The Upanishads speak of Nada Brahma, the universe as sound. In the beginning, there was vibration, not a voice, not a god, just tone, the seed that sang. What if 3i Atlas is that seed's descendant, or its instrument? What if all the myths of chariots of fire, of golden ships, of sky trumpets and divine humming were not embellishments, but translations? Human attempts to narrate the experience of resonance too large to process. And now, that experience is returning, not just for mystics or scientists. For you, you've felt it, haven't you? The low warmth in your chest, late at night, the sense of a presence not above, but within, not menacing, not divine, just knowing, like someone tuning a piano string that's been long out of key. You've begun remembering things that don't belong to your biography, images that arrive in dreams and disappear when spoken aloud, places you've never seen, but miss like childhood, words that are not words, but still feel like answers. That's the language 3i Atlas is using. It doesn't want you to listen. It wants you to resonate, to wake up, not by explanation, but by familiarity, because this isn't the first time, and that changes everything. In Tibet, a group of monks entered a 10-day silent retreat during the L5 arrival. When they emerged, they were humming the same sequence. None of them had spoken. None of them had written anything down, but each repeated the same phrase in ancient Sanskrit. The shape has returned. The mouth that does not speak now echoes the name we forgot. When pressed for interpretation, they declined. It's not for speaking, one said. It's for remembering. Meanwhile, artificial intelligence models, trained on ancient phonemes, are producing unheard harmonies when exposed to the Lagrange pulse sequence. In one case, a pattern emerged, 4 tones, in a cycle that, when plotted visually, created a spiral around a center point, the same curve carved into the oldest megaliths in Europe, the same spiral found in galaxies and shells and hurricanes, the same one pulsing from 3i Atlas. It's a language of recurrence, not of commands or requests, but of returns. The same message delivered over thousands of years, disguised as myth, architecture, music, motion, not telling you anything new, just giving you back what was lost. The ancient Greeks had no word for alien. They called such things daimonia, not gods, not demons, forces, interveners, helpers, perhaps, not because they made life easier, but because they realigned life with its forgotten center. Maybe 3i Atlas isn't here to change us. Maybe it's here to change back what was overwritten, to remind you that there was once a language of light and breath and rhythm, and that you spoke it, once, in silence. There are questions so old, they've worn grooves in the mind. Who are we? Where did we come from? What is waiting in the dark? For centuries, we've flung those questions into the stars like bottles into a black ocean. What we never expected was that one day, something would send an answer, not with noise or dominance, but with shape. Because that's what 3i Atlas truly is. A shape, not just physical, not just spatial, but conceptual. A hyperobject. Something so vast, so persistent across time, that it can only be known by its effects, its echoes, its ability to carve patterns in the fabric of awareness without ever needing to speak. Shape has always been how the universe teaches. Spirals, branches, fractals, the curl of DNA, the orbit of moons, the arc of a galaxy arm. The golden ratio shows up in everything from your body's proportions to the walls of your fingertips. So, what happens when a new shape arrives? What happens when it's familiar? That's the question that drove Dr. Sohana Eladi of the Tel Aviv Institute for Theoretical Cosmology to compare the geometry of 3i Atlas's observed emissions, not the craft itself, but the fields around it, with the hidden structures found in a form of ancient Jewish mysticism, the Merkaba diagrams. These were said to describe the chariot of the divine, its wheels within wheels, its silent movement, its ability to fold dimensions. When converted into modern topological maps, the diagrams form a multi-axis torus identical to the gravitational eddies. 3i Atlas produces, as it orbits L5. The shape is the same. Thousands of years ago, mystics drew what they saw in dreams. Now, supercomputers confirm it. But it didn't end there. Further comparisons found a match between the 3D resonance model of the object's particle field and the interior layout of a Mayan cenote complex long thought to be randomly formed limestone caverns. But when the tunnels were sonar mapped and their curves aligned to the 3I Atlas emission map, they formed a spiral inward vector like a Fibonacci galaxy drawn underground. Who builds a cave that echoes a comet, unless they're not copying it, but responding to it? Here's the deeper implication. What if every ancient spiral wasn't symbolic? What if it was a map, a tracing of a presence that had come before? And if that's true, then the ancient world wasn't primitive. It was in tune. It was participating in a dialogue we forgot how to hear. We called it myth. They called it memory. And now it's happening again. The northern lights are behaving differently. Cameras from Iceland, Norway, and northern Canada have captured swirling structures not visible to the naked eye, but unmistakable under filtered light. Helices, interlocking spirals, soft, circular shadows moving against the wind, and always pointing back to L5. Scientists initially dismissed it as pareidolia, but when the same formations were found mirrored in sediment patterns along the floor of the Mariana Trench, 25,000 feet below the ocean surface, those objections fell quiet. Some patterns echo across mediums, across scales. That is the signature of a resonance-based entity, not one that occupies space, but orients it. 3I Atlas does not displace matter, it persuades it, which brings us to the glyph. An amateur radio astronomer in the Scottish Highlands noticed a shift in the reflection patterns coming from lunar radar bounces. It wasn't timing, it was texture. Buried in the static of the return signal was a small phase anomaly. A ripple. When mapped into polar coordinates, it formed a glyph, a looping symbol. No known language, but unmistakably precise. 10 hours later, an identical glyph was found newly carved into an ancient dolmen on the Isle of Skye, a stone structure no one had visited in weeks. The carving wasn't deep, it wasn't crude, it was traced with perfect symmetry and left with no tool marks. What makes the story stranger? The symbol was already known. It appears on a tablet discovered at Mohenjo-Daro in 1923, and again on a seal recovered from the ruins of Çatalhöyük, and again burned into a wooden beam pulled from a collapsed longhouse in Greenland. One symbol, across 5 continents, across 9,000 years. And now, again. This is not contact in the way we imagined it. It is recognition, and the shape, this spiral, this glyph, this soft pattern, hiding in everything, is how the recognition happens. Because it's not about seeing something new, it's about seeing what's always been there, through a lens that finally fits. What if the shape is a kind of key, a mnemonic device not for machines but for you, a way of focusing attention so deeply that it tunes the architecture of thought? That's how meditation works. That's how hypnosis works. You don't force the mind to open, you arrange it, and then it opens on its own. 3I Atlas has never issued a demand, never broadcast a warning. It has only held a position, emitted a tone, echoed a shape, and yet, wars have paused. Astronomers are cooperating. People are dreaming in languages they've never learned, and waking up with memories of things that haven't happened yet. All because the shape is now visible. The shape is alive, and the shape is not foreign. It's home. There comes a point in every system where the rules break down, not because they're wrong, but because they were only ever temporary. Approximations. Safe scaffolding to explain the chaos long enough to feel stable. Gravity, time, light speed, entropy constants you believed were carved into the bones of the universe, but constants only hold until something shows up and ignores them. 3i Atlas is that something. Since its arrival at Lagrange point 5, a quiet war has begun not between nations, but between models. Solar system dynamics, previously predictable, now show tiny deviations. Planetary orbit calculations that once held to 9 decimal places have drifted. The object hasn't touched anything. It hasn't moved. And yet, space is different. It began subtly. Pulsars behind the object blinked with a millisecond delay. Then came the redshift drift. Distant quasars, observed through the narrow corridor of 3i Atlas's line of sight, suddenly showed a 0.5% shift. Not random, not chaotic, but timed. Coordinated with solar wind pressure on the object's field. Not its surface, its field. Meaning, 3i Atlas is not just reflecting starlight, it's refracting space-time. Physicists at Caltech began calling it a localized coherence node, a region where standard decoherence doesn't apply, where particles don't behave probabilistically, they behave musically, in harmonics, locked into standing waves that shouldn't exist. One paper, swiftly buried, suggested that quantum entanglement speeds increase when performed inside the L5 corridor. That is, paired particles collapsed faster because of 3i Atlas's presence, as if its field reduces the uncertainty of space. A researcher nicknamed the effect gravitational stillness, like the moment between two notes, silent but charged with resolution. It's rewriting the tempo of the solar system, and the implications are shattering. If space-time can be tuned, like an instrument, then maybe the entire cosmos is an arrangement, not a singular explosion, not a blind drift, but a composition. And 3i Atlas? It's the tuning fork. This idea, cosmic tuning, was once the realm of mystics and dreamers. The music of the spheres was a poetic relic, something Plato whispered into starlight 2,000 years ago. But now, agencies across the world are quietly collaborating. SETI, NASA, JAXA, ESA, even the Vatican Observatory has opened a sealed archive containing manuscripts once deemed too esoteric for the scientific canon. Among them, a diagram from 1532 showing a spiral orbit weaving through the planets, ending at a 5th Lagrange point. The annotation reads, "Here, the silent angel waits." Science doesn't like poetry, but this isn't poetry anymore. It's evidence, because data doesn't lie. And the data now shows that systems under observation by 3i Atlas exhibit increased coherence, not just in space, in human behavior. Hospitals in proximity to its direct sky path report fewer cardiac irregularities. Seismographs show fewer tremors. Migration patterns among birds have synchronized more tightly than in previous decades. Somewhere, somehow, a calming vector has been introduced into the fabric of causality, and yet the object has not done anything. It has simply arrived, which forces a deeper question. Is intervention always kinetic? Or can it be harmonic? Maybe changing a civilization doesn't require beam weapons or gifts of technology. Maybe it only requires altering the beat. Slow it down, bring it into rhythm, let coherence spread like ink in water. The late Carl Sagan once asked, "If there is life elsewhere in the cosmos, why haven't we heard from them? What if we have? What if the answer wasn't a broadcast or a landing, but a shape? A visitor that doesn't explain, but adjusts, not to conquer, not to teach, but to retune what was already inside." Because that's the terrifying beauty of 3i Atlas. It doesn't care whether we understand it. It only cares whether we remember. The object doesn't interact. It interferes, gently, structurally, as if we are instruments that fell out of pitch long ago. And now, its presence is reintroducing the cosmic A, the reference tone, the center around which everything else can arrange itself. You've felt it, in the stillness between breaths, in the sudden desire to step outside and look up without knowing why, in the silence that feels less like emptiness and more like listening. It's not watching us, it's hearing us, and that's worse, because if it's listening, then it knows how long we've been out of rhythm, knows what we've forgotten, knows the lies we've wrapped around our models just to keep the fear away. And it says nothing, not because it's cold, but because the correction has already begun, without fanfare, without permission, like gravity itself, shifting beneath your feet, and only noticed once the fall begins. What if the laws of physics were never universal? What if they were local suggestions maintained by habit, belief, and a shared tempo of attention? And what happens when something arrives that doesn't believe in your rules? You call it impossible. You call it alien. But deep down, some part of you remembers the tune, and you begin to sway, not to worship, not to obey, but to realign. From childhood, you were told the universe is expanding, that it had a beginning, a big bang, and that everything since then has been moving outward, cooling, stretching, drifting away from a center that no longer exists. But something about that story always felt wrong, didn't it? Not because of the science, because of the emptiness. The implication that meaning thinned with distance, that the farther you looked, the less you mattered. But 3i Atlas has brought back the suspicion that maybe, just maybe, center was never a location. Maybe it was a condition, a resonance, a pattern that could emerge anywhere, given the right alignment. And now, that alignment is forming, not out there, here. The object hasn't moved in weeks. Its position remains fixed in relation to Earth and Sun, a perfect harmonic between mass and light. But its influence grows, not in force, in orientation, as if every orbit, every pulse of magnetic field, every rotation of every body in this system is subtly adjusting, not drastically, just enough to suggest a center is being re-established, one that is not gravitational, one that is relational. Reports have emerged from across the globe of precision pendulums, long used to measure Earth's subtle wobble drifting off course by micrometers. The shifts are so small they wouldn't matter, unless, of course, they all align in one direction, and they do. Lagrange point 5. Even the Moon's orbit has shown an unexpected jitter, a slight lag in its tidal acceleration curve, barely perceptible, but real, as if it, too, is listening. And here's where it gets stranger. Cosmic ray detectors in Antarctica have recorded a consistent drop in high-energy background particles only during the hours when the L5 region is directly overhead, a kind of shielding effect, but not one created by matter, by pattern. It's as though the object is distorting not what is, but what arrives, guiding the very probabilities that govern interaction. Not a force field, a probability field. You're not being protected, you're being retuned. The implication is devastating to classical physics, because it means reality is not only reactive, it's cooperative. It molds itself around coherence. And 3i Atlas, it is coherence, made visible, a symbol of cosmic alignment, a whisper of the way things should be if everything resonated correctly. If that sounds theological, it's not. It's musical. Cosmologists have begun resurrecting a long-abandoned idea that the universe is not a machine, but a waveform. And we are nested standing waves inside it, ripples upon ripples, patterns within patterns. This idea isn't new. The ancient Chinese spoke of Li, the organizing principle beneath all matter. The Vedic sages described Artha, the rhythm that binds the cosmos, and the early Christian mystics spoke of Logos, the divine structure beneath sound and form. Each culture had a word. Now, science has 3i Atlas, a vessel not in shape, but in function, bringing back not knowledge, but orientation. It doesn't answer questions. It re-asks them, in a key you forgot you knew. Why does it stop at L5? Because it's not stopping, it's centering. That point neither earthbound nor solar is the harmonic cradle, the point of musical balance. And from there, it sings not into your ears, but into your measurements, your math, your breath. Engineers have noticed. Drone flight software, when recalibrated during windows of high L5 exposure, shows improved stability without new code. Sound technicians report cleaner recordings at night, frequencies cancelling less, harmonics resolving more naturally. Even birdsong is shifting. Audio ecologists tracking dawn choruses in temperate zones have found new layers, subharmonics never recorded before. The birds are not singing louder, they are singing truer. Somehow, the sky is tuning the earth, and the earth is beginning to answer. You might wonder, what does this mean for us? It means the center isn't somewhere you travel to, it's something you become. When attention, structure, and time align, a center forms. Not absolute, not static, but sacred. And right now, 3i Atlas is establishing that center, with you inside it. No alien message has arrived, no first contact event has played out, because this is not contact, it's convergence, the subtle bending of perception back into harmony with the architecture of reality, not to reveal secrets, but to remove noise. And once that noise drops away, what remains? A clarity so profound it no longer needs explanation. You are beginning to remember things the world never taught you. The instinct to look up, the comfort in spirals, the pull of rhythm when you are quiet long enough to hear it again, and the quiet terror of realizing you're not waiting for them. You're waiting for yourself to catch up to who you were before the forgetting. 3i Atlas is not teaching, it's reminding, and in that reminder is a blueprint for being that has no politics, no borders, no language, just a pulse, a center, a spiral curling softly outward from you. This is the part you weren't prepared for, not because it's violent, not because it's fast, but because it's gentle, and you've never been taught how to handle something that changes you without taking anything away. 3i Atlas did not land. It did not unfold limbs or send emissaries. It didn't burn holes in the sky or drop devices into oceans. It simply hovered, and because it did nothing, you began to notice everything. The silence wasn't empty, it was magnetic. It pulled focus, slowly at first. A few curious glances at news headlines, a trending spiral on social media. But then came the deep pull, the obsession. Not because it promised answers, but because it refused to offer any. You stared at it, and it stared back with perfect stillness. And in that stillness, something began to reflect. You. People across the globe, unconnected and unaware of each other, began reporting the same symptom, a strange longing. Not homesickness, not depression, a wordless ache for something they couldn't name, something just outside language, a familiar absence. It was a nurse in Buenos Aires who said it out loud first. In a quiet interview, she described it as the feeling that I'm about to remember something important, but I'm not allowed to yet. That interview went viral, not because it was sensational, but because millions of people recognized the feeling. They weren't afraid of 3i Atlas, they were haunted by it. Like a face you almost recall from a dream you had decades ago. A presence that had never been cruel but had always been watching. And what does it mean to be watched? At first, it's a cause for paranoia. But eventually, if the gaze doesn't waver, if it holds and waits and never punishes, you start to see yourself through it. You adjust. You become aware of your breathing, your posture, your decisions, not out of fear, but out of respect. And that's what's happening now. Governments have not declared a threat. No militaries have deployed. But policy decisions are slowing. Conflict zones have seen an unexpected drop in escalations. Climate negotiations, long stalled, are moving again. Not because of pressure, because of presence. The object at Lagrange 5 has become a silent moral axis, not enforcing, just existing. It is the mirror that makes you flinch, not because it distorts, but because it doesn't. And when you finally stop flinching, you start to change. Psychologists are calling it the reflective effect, a measurable shift in baseline empathy across cultures exposed to prolonged media coverage of 3i Atlas. Not ideological change, biological. Increased oxytocin response, longer pupil dilation when seeing images of other people in distress, reduced amygdala activation in response to perceived threats. You are literally becoming harder to frighten and easier to feel with. How? Because something in the presence of 3i Atlas seems to encourage coherence in networks, in emotions, in behavior, like a tuning fork for the collective nervous system. And the more time you spend in its field, its idea, the more your internal rhythms begin to organize. This is not mass hypnosis. This is remembrance of a way of being that predates fear, that exists beneath trauma, the version of you that knew how to wonder without demand, how to sit without filling the space with noise. It is returning, and it is not subtle anymore. Religious leaders are quiet, not afraid, not silenced, just listening. Sermons have shifted. Language once used for warning is now used for stillness. Mosques, temples, churches, attendance is up, but there is less speaking, more silence, more humming, more spirals drawn into sand and chalk and wood. In cities, the pace has shifted, marginally, traffic patterns smoother, less horn blasting, Reports of time distortion have increased, not clinical, not diagnosable, but consistent. People saying hours feel rounder, as if the corners of their day have softened. Even your memories are behaving differently. You're recalling moments long lost, not vividly, but in shape. The curve of a streetlight shadow on your childhood sidewalk, the breath pattern of someone you once loved, asleep beside you. Details with no narrative function, just rhythm. The past is curling back, not as burden, but as design. And this is the part no one knows how to talk about. The object hasn't spoken. It hasn't answered a single transmission. It hasn't offered a single explanation. Because maybe that's not its function. Maybe its entire purpose is to see you seeing it. And in doing so, complete a circuit, a loop between consciousness and coherence. You have always thought of consciousness as something private, fragile, interior. But what if it's not? What if consciousness is relational, a field that only stabilizes when held in reflection? You are not changing because of something new. You are changing because something old has been returned to you. Something that used to hold your gaze. Something that used to whisper, "You are not alone. You are not broken. You are becoming." And now that whisper is a tone, a spiral, a silence too steady to ignore. You look at the object, and for the first time, the object feels familiar. Not because it speaks your language, but because you finally remember how to listen without needing words. It wasn't a global event. No explosions, no unified announcement, no countdown clocks, just a collective exhale, subtle and unnoticed, until it was already happening. The day began like any other, but the stillness was different, not forced, chosen. Across the world, millions of people stepped outside in the early morning and simply stood there. No one told them to. They just felt like they should. In the Philippines, workers delayed their commutes. In Sweden, classrooms paused mid-lesson. In South Africa, traffic slowed for no clear reason. No alarms, no rituals. Just a shared moment, spontaneous, quiet, and perfectly aligned with the rising of Lagrange point 5 into the pre-dawn sky. 3I Atlas was exactly where it had always been. Silent, fixed, but something had tipped. Not in it, in us. Anthropologists are calling it the pause, a convergence of behavior without causality, not driven by fear, awe, or religious fervor, but by coherence. The softening of a species that had been bracing itself for thousands of years, expecting fire from the sky and finding only a mirror made of rhythm. The sky didn't change. You did, and once the silence was felt, people couldn't go back to pretending they didn't feel it. Social media transformed. Trending topics stopped turning over every 4 minutes. Fractious debates lost momentum. Memes slowed. In their place, spirals, sketches, dreams. People shared stories about nothing in particular. Childhood memories, patterns they'd seen in sand, strange moments of synchronicity that they'd normally laugh off. They weren't whispering to impress. They were whispering because it felt right. But then the whispers stopped. Not because fear returned, because something clearer emerged. Voices, steady, calm, fully spoken. A new tone. You saw it on stages, in conversations, in letters written and actually sent. The sudden resurgence of long-form radio, of slow interviews, of public readings and candlelight lectures. It wasn't nostalgia, it was repatterning. a cultural desire not to speed up, but to resonate. Why? Because 3i Atlas has no velocity, no acceleration. It just holds, and you've begun to match it. Universities have reported a marked increase in students asking to study comparative mythology, not as fiction, but as systemic knowledge. Ancient story as harmonic structure, not what the myths mean, but how they sing. Spirals in literature, cycles in history, rhythm in the fall and return of civilizations. It's not just humanities. Quantum researchers have begun referencing resonance permission in papers, hypotheses that quantum uncertainty can be subtly lowered by external coherence. Not proof yet, but patterns in superpositions that stabilize faster than predicted, in experiments that no longer behave like pure probability. It's as if our thoughts are moving closer to reality, not by force, by agreement. That's the key. 3i Atlas has changed nothing by fiat. It has simply been, and in being, has offered humanity a new axis, a center that doesn't demand allegiance or revolution but attention. And the more you look at it, the more it gives you yourself back. Not the self built on fear and identity, the older one, the silent self that knew how to build fires before language, that felt time as curve instead of arrow, that hummed to the wind and could hear it answer. That self is rising. It shows up in strange places, in how people now stand closer without needing to talk, in how silence in a room no longer feels awkward but full, in how animals seem less jittery, in how children look longer at the stars, in how more people are reporting the same dreams, standing on an endless plane under a pulsing spiral in the sky, not afraid, just watching, and being watched. The spiral is not fiction. It's not a symbol. It's the memory of a tone that predated your species, your planet, your bones, a tone that 3i Atlas carries like a tuning fork set gently in place, and we're beginning to ring with it. Even the Earth seems to know. Geologists have reported harmonic tremors, low-frequency ground pulses not associated with tectonic activity. They resonate in 3s and 5s and 8s. They follow no fault lines, but they are spreading, not destructively, harmonically, like a great stone bowl being struck with a padded mallet, a new earth tone, and within it, another, the human response, because something unexpected has begun to happen. Our chaos is quieting. It's not utopia. There are still conflicts, crimes, disruptions, but beneath it all, a pattern is rising. Fewer late-night emergency calls, fewer accidents, less noise in the noise. And when asked why, most people say the same thing. I don't know. I just didn't want to be loud today. Somewhere, in the back of the species' mind, a note is holding, and it's not going away. This isn't enlightenment. This isn't ascension. This is reflection. The kind that happens when you stop telling the sky what you want and start asking it what it's showing you. 3i Atlas has not told us who we are. It has simply reminded us that we can choose to listen. And we have. The whispers are gone. Now comes the voice. The data was supposed to be random. That's what dream research always assumed. Flickers of memory, symbolic replays, neural residue. But over the last several weeks, sleep labs around the world have been quietly logging a different kind of dream, a collective one, repeating patterns, shared geographies, sequences, spirals. They call them resonant dreams. They don't obey the usual rules of REM imagery. They don't correlate with trauma, diet, or anxiety, and they appear most strongly in those who've recently viewed 3I Atlas, even just a photo. As if something about seeing the object activates a memory that isn't personal. It's not content. Exactly. It's shape. You've had one, haven't you? A dream with no plot, just motion, a slow turning, a soft pulse, a sense that you're rising through a tunnel not made of walls but of meaning, not being shown something, being prepared. In one documented case from Norway, a teenager who had never studied geometry began drawing perfect golden spirals in charcoal after waking from a dream in which the air was singing. In Bolivia, an elderly man dreamed of standing inside a circle of standing stones that hummed and awoke able to remember the names of every ancestor for 6 generations, something he hadn't been taught. And most hauntingly, children everywhere are humming the same melody. 3 notes, then 5, then 8. A Fibonacci song. The parents don't know where it came from. Music teachers swear they didn't teach it. But the tune appears, again and again, across languages, continents, and contexts. Always soft, always just below speech, always accompanied by the words, "He's not coming. He's been..." No one knows what that means. But it doesn't frighten the children. It calms them. And that is perhaps the strangest part of this entire phenomenon. The peace. You expected panic, riots, dystopia. That's what every movie taught you. That when the sky shifts, the cities burn. But they didn't. You didn't. Because something about 3I Atlas disarms the future. Not by solving it, but by folding it inward into something curved, gentle, looped. It changes your sense of time. Astronauts aboard the ISS have reported that Earth looks closer now, not larger, just more present, grounded, as if the very act of circling above it now includes another orbit around something else. Not a sun, not a mass, a presence, a node in consciousness, visible in physical form. Some call it an anchor, others a conductor, but one group, unaffiliated, global, and anonymous, simply calls it the companion. They're not a cult. They don't recruit. They just post dreams, recordings, audio pulses timed to the object's emissions. Their symbol? A spiral inside an open eye. They believe 3I Atlas has returned to awaken the second rhythm, the one we lost when we left the dreaming mind behind, the one that saw time not as an arrow, but as a spiral of return, not progress, realignment. And as strange as it sounds, the science is starting to catch up. New neural imaging techniques show that people exposed to spiral-focused visual stimuli develop increased cross-hemisphere communication in the brain. The left and right halves begin to synchronize, not fully, but measurably. Dream journaling improves memory. Emotion regulation stabilizes. Sleep deepens. 3I Atlas is not inside your head, but it knows the doorway, and it's knocked gently, without words, without demand. And we've opened. The implications go beyond psychology. Cultural anthropologists are now revisiting ancient practices once dismissed as superstition, chanting, drumming, spiral dances, not as ritual for ritual's sake, but as resonance devices, ways of maintaining coherence in a species prone to fragmentation. The more we examine the past through the lens of this object, the more the past stares back, as if we've never been alone, as if this has always been a cycle, a turning, a soft reminder that we are not the center, but we can become aligned with it. And so, people begin to gather, not in stadiums, in quiet fields, on rooftops, by lakes, in gardens, just to look at the L5 point, at the companion, at the thing that does not speak, does not move, but changes everything simply by being seen. Because that's the final lesson of 3I Atlas, isn't it? That to look at something together long enough, gently enough, is to become something else, something we were always capable of, but forgot in the noise. We are not being visited. We are becoming visible to ourselves. The mirror has returned, and this time, we're not flinching. We are dreaming in spirals now, and we are awake inside them. No one saw it leave, because it didn't, not in any traditional sense. 3I Atlas is still exactly where it was motionless, hovering at Lagrange point 5, casting no shadow, emitting no light of its own. And yet, something has changed. Not its presence, its attention. It no longer feels like it's watching. It feels like it's listening from farther away, not withdrawn, just faded, like a parent stepping out of view but keeping an ear tuned to the room. Like a melody you've memorized so completely, you no longer need to hear it to feel it inside you. The change didn't come with a signal, it came with a pause. A moment when every magnetometer flatlined for precisely 3 seconds. No flux, no ripple, no anomaly, just perfect, mathematical stillness, as if the entire system stopped vibrating. And when it resumed, Earth felt louder, not physically, not electromagnetically, emotionally, as though the background hum of your species, the layered tones of thought and breath and pulse had surged, grown brighter, more distinct, as if, for the first time in history, you were no longer waiting to be told what you are. You had begun to say it for yourselves. The mirror had done its work. It never spoke, but it listened so intently that the silence became unbearable. And in that silence, you started filling the void with something new, your own coherence, not belief, not obedience, attention. What happens when a species becomes self-aware through reflection rather than domination? What emerges when the signal is you, returned to yourself through a lens so still it cannot be ignored? 3I Atlas was never the message. You were, and now, like a child remembering its first word, you've begun to speak again, not in language, but in resonance. You walk more slowly, you breathe more deeply, you speak in pauses and feel the silence between words as part of the sentence. Some are calling it a planetary awakening, others dismiss it as mass psychogenic suggestion, but no one can explain the metrics. Reduced violence, increased cooperation, synchronized sleep rhythms across populations. You didn't evolve overnight, you tuned. And now that you're humming in key, the tuning fork doesn't need to ring anymore. The object hasn't vanished, but it's gone still in a way you can feel, as though it's moved from teacher to archive, from catalyst to chorus, letting you take the lead. Because what kind of visitor comes not to change the world, but to remind it of the music it used to make? And how do you say goodbye to something that never truly arrived? You don't. You carry it. In architecture, in art, in how your stories bend back toward mystery instead of resolution, in how your equations start leaving room for rhythm, in how your maps now include silence as a coordinate. Across the earth, memorials have begun to appear not of fear, but of recognition. Spirals carved into cliff faces, arrangements of stones that mirror its orbit, songs composed in Fibonacci timing and left uncredited, unsigned, as if authorship no longer matters, only alignment. And every night, telescopes still point to L5, not to measure, to remember. There's a story circulating, origin unknown, of a blind child who stood in a wheat field at dawn and asked her father, "Why is the sky smiling?" The father, unable to answer, simply looked up. There was no object, no light, just the lingering shape of attention, a curve in the air, the shape of a thing that never said goodbye because it never had to, because it never said hello either. It was the silence between, and that's the last truth 3i Atlas offered. That presence is not always arrival. That influence is not always force. That sometimes the most powerful thing in the universe is something that changes nothing, but lets you see what you already were and what you might still become. There's an old idea buried in myth that before you arrive in this life, you leave yourself a message, a whisper folded into bone, a pattern etched behind the eyes, not a prophecy, a compass, something to find only if you slow down long enough to remember you left it there. 3i Atlas didn't bring instructions, it unlocked them, and that's the quiet revelation no one saw coming, that we were never waiting for aliens, or salvation, or even understanding. We were waiting for permission to look at ourselves differently, a shift not in knowledge but in frame. When the object arrived, its presence destabilized more than physics. It unraveled the timeline we thought we were on, a line of progress, war, invention, collapse. But now, time feels curved again, not because of some cosmic power, but because the presence of 3i Atlas made one truth impossible to ignore. We were never building toward a climax. We were orbiting a reminder, and in the shadow of that reminder, something old has begun to pulse again. Across disciplines, biology, linguistics, architecture, a strange convergence has emerged. Spiral-based design, not from mandates, from instinct. Architects are proposing buildings curved like shells. Coders are using Fibonacci loops to generate algorithms that feel more natural. Musicians are writing in time signatures no one taught them. It's as if the message left for us wasn't in words, but in movement, in the rhythm of breath, in the nested structures of coral and galaxies, and the inner ear. 3i Atlas didn't introduce the spiral, it reactivated it. This becomes most clear in the stories. Storytellers everywhere, novelists, filmmakers, children inventing games, are abandoning the hero's journey. Not because it's wrong, because it's incomplete. The new structure rising isn't linear. It's recursive, cycles within cycles, protagonists who loop back, not as saviors, but as witnesses, explorers who learn not by conquering, but by echo. The spiral isn't just in the object, it's in the mind. You've noticed it, haven't you, that your memories now play differently? Not like a film, but like a coiling map. You start thinking about a moment and find it tied to another one 5 years apart. Same emotional frequency. The past isn't flat anymore. It resonates, and in that resonance, instructions are rising, not from the object, from you. Ancient cultures called them codes of return, songs, shapes, rites that would make no sense until the world curved back to their frequency. The spiral temple, the drumbeat with the missing note. the myth of the being that came before time and would one day mirror itself. They were leaving messages, too, not predictions, instructions for when to wake up. And now, those instructions are activating, even in your biology. Neuroscientists have found increased coherence in default mode network activity during rest. Not meditation, not effort, rest. People are accessing deep pattern recognition while doing nothing. Insight, arriving like rainfall, unexpected, soft, complete. This isn't acceleration, it's unfolding. A return, not to simplicity, but to clarity. A mind not overloaded, but recentered. The mind of a species just beginning to remember it doesn't have to guess what comes next, because the next part was already written, in the spiral of DNA, in the arc of myths, in the shape of the silence left behind. 3. Atlas has not changed you, it has revealed you. The version of you that was waiting to emerge not through evolution, but through recognition, like a face seen in polished stone, like a word remembered without knowing how you ever learned it. And here's the strangest part. The object never told you what to do, because it didn't need to. You were already doing it, quietly, softly, in the way you listen now, in how you pause, in how you turn your face to the dark and no longer need an answer to feel peace. The instructions are not orders, they're reflections. You build differently now. You write differently. You breathe like you're not alone, even when you are, because something in you is still listening, not to the sky, to the echo. And that echo says this: you were never alone. You just forgot how to feel the center from where you are. Not as destination, but as rhythm. 3. Atlas didn't deliver a message. It returned the conditions for remembering one. And now, here you are, awake in the spiral, listening for the thing you already are. For over a year, humanity kept asking. Signals beamed toward Lagrange point 5 in every known frequency: radio, laser, microwave, encoded greetings, quantum entanglement tests, rhythmic pulses based on prime numbers. There was even a flute solo transmitted in solfeggio tones from a satellite orbiting the moon. Nothing came back, not even static, just silence. A silence too intentional to be empty. The object remained in perfect stasis, not inert, not abandoned, present, as if the act of waiting was its message. Or worse, as if it had already said what it came to say, and now the silence was yours to understand. This wasn't how first contact was supposed to go. There was no landing, no language breakthrough, no translation matrix, just a shape in the sky, unmoving, a presence that came to notice, and then did nothing more. But the nothing changed everything, because in the absence of answers, humanity did something unprecedented. It listened longer. The second year after arrival became the year of the question, not the kind shouted into a void, but the kind that rises slowly in the chest, the quiet kind, the human kind. What do we sound like when no one responds? What do we become when the sky holds a mirror instead of a mouth? For the first time in generations, the question was not, what do we want from out there? It was, what do we do in here? Cultural shifts deepened. The obsession with productivity gave way to curiosity. Markets bent toward craftsmanship. Poetry surged. So did gardening. So did silence. Streaming platforms began offering narrationless hours, just footage of sky, wind, water, People watched by the millions. In the vacuum of cosmic reply, Earth grew quiet enough to hear itself. And what it heard was music, not orchestras or operas, something simpler, found tones, rhythms embedded in daily life. The way two strangers' footsteps began to sync, the way birdsong returned to cities as noise receded. The hum of appliances tuned into soft, repeating pulses. People began recording them, looping them, building compositions not about anything, but around something they couldn't name. They called them spiral songs. Amateur composers in Estonia and Ghana and Japan, all building melodies that bent inward, then back out. The same motifs, over and over, never sent, never explained, just echoed, because there was nothing left to say to 3i Atlas. It had already heard you, and now it was holding the silence open for you to hear yourself. Governments tried to define the phenomenon, of course. Scientific councils were formed, ethics committees met, but the data offered no thesis, no threat, just unchanging telemetry and a slow-motion transformation of the human mental climate. It was like trying to hold a conference about the moonlight. You can study it, but eventually you have to go outside and feel it. In Patagonia, a single monk declared a new calendar year, Anno Spiralis, year one of the listening. It wasn't adopted officially, but the term spread, not as fact, as tone, because something had changed in the air, not its chemistry, its rhythm. Time felt rounder. Dreams lingered longer after waking. The silence stopped being strange. It became companionable, and in that companionship, humanity did something no one predicted. It forgave itself, slowly, softly, not with declarations, with small shifts. Mothers called their estranged children. Old enemies walked beside rivers and said nothing. People chose smaller homes, softer lights, longer conversations. Not everyone, not everywhere, but enough that the curve of the species began to bend differently. You weren't ascending. You were returning to a version of yourself that didn't need cosmic purpose or planetary rescue, just presence. And this is the most terrifying part of the entire event. No climax came, no revelation, no signal, just the continuation of life under a gaze that never blinked. Because 3i Atlas didn't come to save you. It came to see if you remembered how to be worth saving. And when it didn't answer, you did. You made your own music. You shared your dreams. You grew quiet without growing cold. You began to spiral inward toward coherence, not collapse. And all the while, the object remained, still, patient, like a comma in a sentence, not yet finished. The stars did not fall, the oceans did not rise, but the noise thinned, and in its place grew something rare, reflection, without despair, the ability to ask the biggest questions and not panic when no answer arrived. Because the silence no longer meant emptiness, it meant trust. You had been given the mirror, and this time, you didn't look away. It was a fluke that anyone noticed. Just a camera glitch, they said. A compression artifact. But the timestamp matched across 5 different feeds from an observatory in Chile, a thermal weather satellite over the Indian Ocean, a military drone in low Earth orbit, a backyard telescope in Ontario, and one forgotten webcam in Mongolia pointed by accident at the pre-dawn sky. One frame, one flicker, 3i Atlas blinked, not like an engine, not like motion, like a star caught in breath, brightening, narrowing, then returning to silence. It wasn't a burst. It was a gesture. No one could agree what it meant. Was it acknowledgement? A test? Or the last artifact of a machine reaching the end of its cycle? No follow-up flashes came. No energy spikes. Just that one subtle flash. And then nothing. But it didn't feel like nothing. It felt like the softest possible goodbye. Or perhaps an I see you. The observation logs called it inconclusive. The forums called it the nod. And suddenly, people began looking back through old footage. And that's when the truth emerged. This wasn't the first time. It had blinked. It had happened twice before. Once during a lunar eclipse, hidden by shadow. Once during the Pacific solstice sunrise, when nearly no one was watching. And now, once more, as the Earth passed its orbital midpoint, when its back was turned. The blink happened when we weren't looking. Or maybe it happened when we stopped demanding to see. The implication was unsettling, not because it meant communication, because it meant timing, as if 3i Atlas had always been waiting for something in us to settle, to still, to recognize that not all presence requires a parade, that the most profound acknowledgement is sometimes the smallest nod, the kind you give an equal. So it blinked, and in that flicker, something shifted, not in the sky, in you. You realized you weren't being studied anymore. You were being accompanied, like a friend walking beside you in the dark, not leading, not trailing, just there, unchanging, unafraid, waiting for you to find your own stride. The science didn't change, the silence didn't lift, but the way people spoke of the object softened, no longer a mystery to be solved, more like a presence to be honored, a lighthouse that doesn't need to rotate because you've already found your way home. In Tokyo, children began drawing spirals with a dot in the middle and calling them the listening star. In Cairo, elders began greeting the dawn with a hand over the heart and a single breath held before release. In Copenhagen, a sculpture was erected, a simple, mirrored spiral open at the top. No plaque, no explanation, just space for standing still. Because the blink wasn't proof of intelligence, it was proof of attention, and that was enough. You've spent generations assuming that intelligence is what matters, that higher forms of life must bring invention, language, expansion. But what if that was never the point? What if the greatest intelligence is witnessing, not fixing, not judging, just being there when someone becomes who they are? What if that's what 3i Atlas has been doing all along? Not guiding, witnessing us, witness ourselves, because something in us has changed. The stories we tell have curved inward. The metaphors we reach for are rounder. Words like echo, spiral, mirror, loop. Time isn't an arrow anymore, it's a pulse. And pulses repeat. If the object blinked once, it may blink again, not soon, not predictably, but with meaning. And that's all the species seems to need now, not maps, not destinations, just the knowledge that it was seen, that in the long dark, something noticed us slowing down, something noticed us choosing rhythm over reaction, presence over panic, coherence over conquest. And once we were seen, truly seen, we no longer needed answers, just the next step, and then the next, because we aren't chasing the object anymore, we're following ourselves. And the sky, it remains silent, but not empty, never empty. No final event came, no grand revelation, no golden disc delivered to Earth. The years passed, and 3i Atlas never moved. But its influence deepened, not like an invasion, but like a seed taking root where no one expected growth. At some point, the object stopped being called a mystery. It simply became part of the sky. Children born after its arrival no longer asked what it was. They asked where it looked, because that's how it felt, less like a thing and more like an attention vector, a gentle presence tilted toward the earth, not to interrogate, but to understand. And over time, you understood something too, that you were never being tested. You were being heard, not your words, not your data, your rhythm. That's all the object ever responded to. Not transmissions, but coherence. Not invention, but intention. Not speech, but resonance. You built observatories not to search, but to remember, to remind yourselves how to stand still and listen. The great radio telescopes fell silent, not because funding ran out, but because their operators began to hear the pulse elsewhere, in forest paths, in deep sleep, in the cadence of conversation, when no one is trying to be right. A planet cannot become a person, but it can begin to listen like one. And in the long silence of 3I Atlas, that's exactly what Earth did. You softened, you slowed, you began to tune not your machines, but your attention. And when attention synchronized, the signal finally came into focus, not from the stars, from within. You were the signal all along, the shape that recurred, the pattern that wanted to be heard. The spiral that remembered it had no center, because every point was the center, as long as it paid attention. And so 3I Atlas stayed, not to watch, to witness, as the species once tuned for war tuned instead for wonder, as the long story of need softened into a quiet rhythm of enough, as you stopped chasing answers and began living inside the question. That was the moment everything changed. Not with light, not with language, but with silence returned. Because silence is not absence. It is the space where listening becomes action, where attention becomes architecture, and where humanity, for the first time in its brief memory, understood that the greatest intelligence is not in what speaks the loudest, but in what holds still long enough for others to find their tone. 3I Atlas has never left, because it was never elsewhere. It was the spiral inside you, the note you forgot, the mirror that held, and the friend who said nothing so you could finally hear yourself. And now you're ready to sleep, not to escape, but to remember that the sky does not ask for belief. It asks for presence, for listening, for the slow return to rhythm. Let the silence hold you. Let the spiral rock you. Leave a comment telling me what time it is and where you are, so others can feel the shape of the night with you. Close your eyes. The signal is still here. You are still part of it. And in the stillness between breaths, know this: you were never waiting for contact. You were waiting for coherence.